You do. Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that we do a lot in Worth Cities, which is an editorial platform that Worth created in 2016, and the idea at the time was really to focus on what some people call second-tier cities. I don't use that term because it just doesn't sound nice. But I like to have smaller, mid-sized cities, or as we say today, rising cities. Of course, we hope that all cities are always rising, but there are two here that really are. And in the process of developing that editorial content, we worked very closely with a lot of what are known as destination marketing organizations, sometimes called convention and visitor bureaus, and found that these were really important organizations, but were not, I thought, well understood and not always well known. So we wanted today to bring sort of two representatives of I think, the finest, most successful ones, Martha Sheridan from Boston. Do any of you all know Helen? I love the hometown crowd. Who really have had and are having just a huge influence on their cities, on redefining cities, on making the cities more inclusive places. So we wanted to have Martha and Helen here to talk about their cities, to talk about what they do, what their jobs are, and how they impact the future of Boston and Charleston. And I know you both have some presentations, and we're going to get to those in a couple questions. But first, I guess I'd just like to let's start with Martha, to learn a little bit about how you envision your role, because I know it varies from organization to organization.
It does. Great question. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here in this beautiful city. I was telling Helen earlier that my husband went to the College of Charleston. We've been here a few times, and the service and the hospitality in this city is like no other. And I say that coming from a city that I think is pretty friendly, although you all may not.
Not for us Yankee fans.
Oh, let's not get into that. We got a series coming up, Richard, this week.
Well, bless your
heart. You're okay. Trust me. But that's an interesting question. And if you had asked me that 10 years ago, the answer would have been completely different than it is today. So 10 years ago, if you had asked what's our role would be singular: heads in beds, butts in seats. That's it. All of our boards just wanted one thing: you got to bring people to our city to spend money. I don't care who they are, as long as they can pay the room rate, right? Meet in our convention centers, we're happy. And COVID changed all of that. So COVID came around, and we were starting to sort of evolve before COVID, of course, but between COVID and George Floyd's murder, our roles changed completely and dramatically. So during COVID, and my counterpart, Kristen, is here as well from Providence, we became advocates, we became counselors, we became psychiatrists, we became anything that our industry needed to survive what was and probably will always remain the biggest economic and social crisis that the tourism industry has really ever seen. And it really changed our perspective on what our role is. And it also changed the perception from the outside looking in of what our role should be. And I'm forever grateful for that. Believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying I'm grateful for something but that came out of COVID, but it really is true. And I just say two things. One is the role of advocate became incredibly powerful for us as people were seeking answers constantly to how we regain the meeting space, health, with our colleagues in mind, with our associates in mind. So we were constantly that conduit. The second thing is, with George Floyd's murder, I think every city across the United States had a reckoning, and across many spectrums, but even in the tourism space. So we were putting out statements on what this meant to our organization and how it fit into our community. Our then mayor, Marty Walsh, who then became Secretary of Labor and now is with the NHL, proclaimed racism a public health crisis in the city of Boston. And that changed how we did our jobs, and for the better. So I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like when we get to our new campaign. But so now we're advocates, we are conveners. And we like to think that we are the storytellers for our cities, telling the true and authentic story of the people and what it means to be part of our communities.
Helen, what about you at Explore Charleston? Did it start with heads and beds?
Well, we say that our job is to create an overnight visitor. But I will say from the earliest days, we've always believed that tourism was the first step in economic development, because you weren't going to create anything new unless someone came as a visitor first. So in addition to everything Martha said, I really think that was the first thing for us.
So I want to touch on or talk a little bit more about that 2020 George Floyd moment. And the theme of this panel is about inclusion and redefining cities. Martha, I know for one thing, your organization, you actually chose a new name for it. Talk a little bit about that and kind of what you saw as your priorities and how to make these important topics, race, the legacy of race, a part of the conversation.
Well, prior to the name change, we actually received funding from the city of Boston through the CARES Act to develop a tourism campaign during COVID that focused on equity and inclusion, and it was called All Inclusive Boston. We worked, it was my organization, and we worked with two Black-owned communications firms, and that was the mandate for the RFP, was, you need to shift the focus of what people perceive Boston to be, and if you read the article in Worth magazine, it's tough to read, but it's somehow somewhat true, although getting better, that Boston has a reputation that it's a racist city. So we had to start to overcome that from the inside out. So
and you actually did some market research on that as well, right? It's not just what Worth magazine said.
No, it's not. No, we actually did, and it was pretty eye-opening. This market research showed us that people's perception of Boston was that it was predominantly white males who love sports and were drunk a lot. So we knew we had our work cut out for us. And in fact, I want to tell you a quick story because Arthur's here. I'm a big college basketball fan, and during this campaign, just post-COVID, I'm at Madison Square Garden watching the Big East tourney, and our great partner, Sam Adams, love Sam Adams, no disparagement, but they were a sponsor, and on the Jumbotron comes the "My Cousin from Boston" ad, and I was like, no, please no. And not only did they play the ad, they panned the entire arena for the guy who looked most like my cousin from Boston. I thought, okay, I still have a lot of work to do. So, but anyway, the research was eye-opening, but it gave us a good place to start.
Helen, what about for Explore Charleston?
Well, it's interesting that growing up in Charleston, and I really didn't know we were different until I left. I tell people I got to Clemson University, and I realized that not everybody grew up with a friend that was of a different faith, Catholic or Jewish, or a friend that was a different color. And that was something that was a little unique about Charleston, is although we're a small community, we have a lot of the characteristics of a bigger community. But also, for better or for worse, we had a little head start on the rest of the country because of the massacre at Mother Emanuel. And I will tell you that if you talk to our team, it really changed us. That was really one of the worst things that a community can go through, but also we learned so much because those great folks forgave, because the Lord requires us to forgive, but more importantly, they pushed us toward reconciliation, that the work's not done yet, right? The work's not done. And I think that's why we care so much about this, and we are so committed to working at it so hard, and they are a true inspiration. In July 22nd, we're going to break ground for the Mother Emanuel Memorial. Really, really special place, a sacred space. And that next step is what happens next. And telling telling this story is important. And I think we're all about it.
Yeah, and I think you're being in some ways unduly modest, which is to say, this conversation, the reason we're having this conversation is in large part because at Explore Charleston, you all have been fostering those conversations for years. And I will say that ever since we at Worth began meeting with you all and learning about your city almost 10 years ago now, this is a theme that you have been saying. And it's an interesting thing when you think about DMOs in a number of places. They want you to visit hotels. They want you to try their restaurants. They don't typically say, we encourage you to write about the issue of race in our city. And that has been happening with you all. It's one of the things that has been
We left the
foundation of this event today.
We left that Moonlight and Magnolias narrative a long time ago.
That's right.
And but it needed to be left behind. And Doug Warner and I like to say that all of our history is important. Not all of it's pretty, but we have been rewarded for telling that story, because I think visitors today are really looking for that experience, and we're really pleased to be able to share that message. So, my dear friend Rhett Outen, you know what that is right there? So, ladies and gentlemen, nobody can believe. So, if you can see in that slide, you'll see. I wish I had a pointer. You'd be able to see the beginning of Market Hall. But I think it's always important to talk about where we've been. One of the things that happens to us a lot is folks that see Charleston for the first time see the polished jewel that it is today. And it wasn't always like this. So this parking lot right here is where Charleston Place sits today. And it was a place between King and Market Street that Caroline and Rhett and I weren't allowed to ride our bikes when you go into Ashley Hall. And that really started with tourism as economic development, that economic growth for our community. We're really, really fortunate that I've got some amazing leaders in this community. Many of my board members are here. John Laverne's over there, Dan Bloomingstock, Terry Sedalic, Michael Tall's over there, Rhett Outen, and y'all loved Femi. Femi's the best. He brings wine to the board meetings, by the way. So that having that catalyst that started in 1986 with Charleston Place really changed how our community used tourism as the hook for economic development. Steve Dykes, is that fair to say it was a hook? It was a good hook, right? You know, but it was really the other kind of big decisions that we made. If you look back to the past, what were the things that really mattered? So first of all, it was that using tourism as economic development. Second, we had Hurricane Hugo. And if you think about a storm that truly, and we've had a lot of hurricanes since then, but Hurricane Hugo was really one of the real big ones. And it really, really devastated this community. The interesting thing was the historic parts of our community were pretty stable. We laughed and said, but you can't run over to Lowe's to get slate tile roof. We really had to, we learned some things, right, from Hugo. But the most important thing we learned is that we can reach out to the media like you can reach out to any other group. So we always say that we were doing media relations before it was cool. Because the stories that came out of Hugo, remember this is before we had the communication tools we had. I've got a great paper from the London Times that says Charleston, South Carolina, gone with the wind. And they talked about Middleton Plantation Gardens being completely destroyed and things that weren't necessarily true, not because they wanted to write something that wasn't true, but because it was difficult to get good information. So we turned around and went back, and after that, we ended up with all these great stories about Charleston, South Carolina being strong and recovering, and it really made the difference, and we still do that today. And the last thing in the past, and I already mentioned, was really leaving Moonlight and Magnolias behind. But as we look forward, I just want to say that the three things that we're doing now that really matter. One is, does anybody recognize that? Oh, it says King Street. I'm going to let you. This is King Street in 1960. And it was in decline. And one of the things that has changed for our community is we know that we have to lift up what makes us different. We're not any town USA. And Martha and I will laugh at this, but every community, I just recently got back from a Travel South meeting. And y'all, I watched 11 videos from 11 southeastern states, and guess what they all said? It's a great place to live, work, and play. And they all had beautiful pictures, right? It was great, and they were great videos, but they looked the same. And so we have to talk about what makes us different. And King Street is one of those jewels that makes us different. The other new thing that we've really focused on, probably in the last, since 2010, was on air service. And it really happened because one of our corporate headquarters, and we didn't have a lot Lindsay back then, there was no Boeing, we found out that they were going to hold their national meeting somewhere else. And I was devastated. I was like, you can't have your national meeting somewhere else. And the CEO said, Helen, honey, we can't fly everybody in on Tuesday and out on Friday. And we knew then that if we didn't get involved in air service development, we were destined to be a great drive community. Not that that's a bad thing, right? But that's where we were headed. So that's the other really new thing that we've done, besides focusing on the messaging. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about aviation and connectivity with Rising Cities a little bit later. Martha, let's go to you because I know you.
Sure. So one other very important silver lining for us out of COVID was that we were a severely underfunded organization when I arrived there 4.5 years ago. Our total budget was $7.5 million compared to our competitive set cities like Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Chicago, who were $30 and $40 million budget. So we were allowing other people to tell our story, right? Matt Damon, God, we love Matt Damon, we love Ben Affleck, aren't they amazing? But the donkeys thing, it doesn't always resonate so well. So because we didn't have the funds to tell it the way we wanted to tell it, and to tell the authentic story of Boston and our neighborhoods and beyond the history, we know we're a great historic city.
And you're also competing with the Hollywood portrayals of Boston,
Right.
which Mystic River, that's a tough one. The Town, that's not so
Exactly.
complimentary.
Yeah.
They're wonderful movies, they're great stories, but they're not.
I like to focus on Julia Child these days. A little bit easier to take. But anyway, let's not even talk about Whitey Bulger, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so what we did was we developed a tourism destination marketing district, and we grew our budget to $40 million today, and it's now been a game changer for us. So we embarked on a new branding campaign. As Richard mentioned, we went from the Greater Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau, our GBCVB, which was always a mouthful, nobody ever got it right, and we became Meet Boston because we feel like it really encapsulates sort of that double entendre of, yes, come to meet in Boston, but come and meet the new Boston. This is not the same Boston that you remember. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave the history behind, but we could still focus on the new stuff. It's not either or, it's both, and I'm sure you feel the same way. So we hired a firm, we went out to bid, we did a national search, we get about 20 responses, narrowed it down, and thankfully, because Helen will know this, we ended up with a Boston-based firm, because if we hadn't picked a Boston-based firm, it would have been another PR problem that we would have had to solve, but we were open to anyone, so we hired a great firm. So they developed with us, with our committee, which was a very diverse group of individuals, what we call our Meet Boston guiding principles, and this is everything that we base our campaign on, and even now our internal operations. We want to make sure that we're inclusive. We reflect a more inclusive and authentic version of Boston. We want to be newsworthy. We want to be a city constantly in motion. That's a really important statement for us because we don't want to look backwards. We want to keep going forward.
So Boston in February, constantly in motion, right? That's part of what you're talking about.
It really is, yeah. I mean, winter month promotion. We drove huge amounts of occupancy with our new campaign in winter months because we're taking away the fear of people coming to Boston and actually doing stuff outside. It's okay to be outside in cold weather, and I think COVID made people embrace that, so that worked well in our favor. Of course, we want to be historic. We don't want to dismiss that. We want to be transportive and, of course, proud. We want to be proud of Boston. We want people to look at Boston the way we look at it internally and not the way you might perceive it from the outside looking in. So we came up with, this is a very shortened version of sort of our brand anthem, but Greater Boston, fueled by the collective spirit of transformation, is a city built by motion and designed to stay in motion. And we like to use the phrase, not publicly, but internally, Boston was founded, but we've never settled.
I love that.
And that's
I love
exactly what is so true about our city.
So good.
So our theme is Boston Never Gets Old. And that's the campaign we've been working on for the past 6 or 8 months, and it's been really successful. It's underpinned by this one video that I'm going to show you that really encapsulates sort of the feel for this new campaign and how we actually see our Boston from the inside looking out.
Hold up. Equitable, I see you. Equitable, I see you. Say hallelujah. Amen. Say hallelujah. I've been loving you.
Fantastic.
Thank you. I like to say, this is not your grandmother's Boston. And I say grandmother, not grandfather, because you'll notice we have a female governor, we have a female lieutenant governor, we have our first Black female attorney general, we have an Asian female mayor, and I am the first female CEO of Meet Boston. So
Girls rule.
we're changing for sure.
You know, and you haven't spoken about this photo, this image, which I think is really important as well. This is, I want to say, this is on the Boston Common, which I'm told is the oldest public park in the country. This is a big addition to it. Why don't you?
Sure, this
share a little
is
bit about
Embrace
that?
Boston. Many people don't know that Martin Luther King Jr. met Coretta Scott King in Boston while they were, he was at Boston University, and they fell in love. They actually developed a lot of their, I would say, a unity around their mission while they were together in Boston. There were marches in Boston, a lot of public speaking and et cetera. But so this Embrace Boston is actually a monument to Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King Jr. It's actually a take on a photo that was taken after, while they were in Boston, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and this is their embrace. And the gentleman there is one of the most incredible humans in Boston. His name is Amari Parrish Jeffries. I know that Richard had the chance to speak with him, and he's the executive director. And this is just a beautiful monument in the center of the city, in a place where Black people did not always feel welcome through the years. So it's really amazing to have it there.
Statutes matter, as we know, but pro and con. Yeah. And also, I think one of the things that you may not realize just from looking at this photo is it's very hard to get a change on the Boston Common, right? This is not something that people want to tinker with, want to change lightly. So it's a big deal. I want to come back to that theme of history. Your two cities are, I don't know if you're the two oldest cities in the country, but you're
We got to be
certainly up
close.
there. Philadelphia, probably New York as well. Wonderful histories, iconic, inspiring histories, but also, as you mentioned, lots of pain in those histories as well. Part of what you're doing is trying to address that, and in a way that positions both your cities as looking towards the future in a very healthy way. How does it feel?
I really do think embracing the truth, right? And telling the story. And you heard Dr. Matthews talk about the stories. And that's what we've been doing,
Right.
is telling the stories. And from the perspective of the person telling it. And it creates a richness and to the destination. And the richness of the fabric of telling the story matters. And we really are excited about where we're going, right? The stories we're telling. A lot of it, we talk about the hero's journey, because in Charleston, it's hard to see anything that wasn't touched by African-American life, right? Whether it was our beautiful ironwork, our beautiful architecture, the food that we sell, right? Every day, the arts and culture that we celebrate. So that's the magic right there, is telling the story.
Martha, how do you?
Same. I mean, I think the key is just acknowledging the truth. And the fact is, Boston is a minority. I don't like this phrase, but I don't know how else to put it. Minority majority city, 57% non-white. And I think that probably surprises most of you in this room, right? Because I don't think people think of Boston that way. So it's not only us telling the story. I think the important thing is, and Helen alluded to this, it's allowing our people to tell the story. So we develop a series that we get into each neighborhood. We have 23 beautiful, diverse neighborhoods. And we talk to people in those neighborhoods, and we let them tell the story via a series of videos that we're developing. So everything we do is, as I said, those 6 principles, but it's really based on, is this our truth? And we don't want to sugarcoat it. And I'd love that whole, come stay play, whatever it is, because it really does look like every city USA. And I think you can see by the video we produce, we don't want to be that every city USA. We want to be different, authentic, and compelling. Every city wants to be compelling.
And we want to keep covering that at Worth. So thank you both so much.
Thank you all for coming.